Winter is coming.
Has winter finally come to your D&D campaign? Or are you playing an Arctic adventure like Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden? Then this terrain might just be for you. This is the first of a series of videos I'll be making on Arctic terrain. This one will be about the base tiles. When starting a project like this, I like to gather some references to give me an idea of the aesthetic I'm trying to achieve with my build. I managed to find some nice images that conveyed both the stark beauty but also the dark, ominous side of this winter terrain. And then I found some more. I started off by cutting the tiles. For this I used some lesser quality foam that I wouldn't use for detailing, for an example, and which was quite a bit cheaper. I cut these into 15 cm squares, about 15 mm thick. For those of you not using the metric system, that is roughly 6-inch squares, each half an inch thick. With all those cut, I went on to create the rough shape of the snowy surface. To make this, all you need is a mixing cup, some wall repair plaster, water and a mixing stick. I personally like to use these large boxes from Knauf. They usually last me a good long while and aren't expensive at all. And you can mix them in any thickness you want. Just be aware that this stuff begins to cure quite fast. You have about 15 minutes to handle it, so work in small batches. I managed to do about 3 tiles per mix. Be generous with your water when mixing the wall repair. It will assure a smoother finish. If you use less water, the texture becomes more rock or earth-like. So once you've got it all mixed, simply add a bunch to your towel and start spreading it out with your finger. I personally wear gloves because the water in the mix turns my finger all wrinkly, making it harder to get a consistent texture. Most of my base tiles I kept plain and bare like this, but for several I decided to add some pieces of bark, which would function as large rock formations that jut out of the snow. I would then use the plaster to create a snowbank on one side of this boulder or rock, where the wind may have blown the snow up against it. I repeated this step several times until about 1/3 of my base tiles had some sort of rock formation added to it. As you can see here, sometimes stretch the pliability of the plaster a bit. This caused the surface to show each stroke of the finger and the texture to turn rougher. A simple solution for that is to shake the surface using your finger. This draws water outward and turns it nice and smooth. Once I applied the plaster to all the tiles, I left them out to dry overnight. Depending on how thick you applied your plaster, they might take a bit longer to dry. You'll know they are done once the plaster surface doesn't feel cold to the touch anymore. When dry, I started sanding the edges since some of the plaster had leaked over. Luckily this stuff is relatively soft and a few passes was already enough to get the edges nice and smooth again. After sanding came painting, beginning with a snow white base coat. I mixed the paint with wood glue, sticking to a rough 50-50 ratio. This ensures the tiles are strong and durable in the end. I covered everything in this white base coat, including the edges, but left the rocks mostly untouched, as they would get a coat in black. Because the wood glue would dry up clear, I would suggest you put on 2 or 3 layers, if you want the white to stick. Wouldn't this be a great moment for an edgy joke? But I think I'll just brush that aside. Since I'm not one to bark orders, I'll just leave a suggestion of how you can paint your rocks. I first painted them with a black paint, which I also mixed with wood glue. When painting these, I carefully avoided any areas that would later be covered in snow flocking. After the black, I covered in a basic grey, which I then dry brushed with a lighter grey, and later I went over it again with a standard white. I went lighter than I usually would, but I thought the white on the edges looked like frost had gathered on the cold stone, therefore suiting our winter environment. Once the paint had dried, I mixed up some wood glue with water in a 50-50 ratio, which I then added to the top of the tiles. To apply the watered down glue, I use these wash bottles, which give me great control over how much glue I add to the tiles. Yeah, just make sure the nozzle doesn't get clogged. With the glue on there, I simply grabbed my regular baking sieve and added a decent coat of flocking. For this I used the Woodland Scenic Soft Flake Snow. I find it has a really nice and soft texture to it. After each tile, I always collected the excess flocking that had fallen to the side, just in case I had some glue leakage with the next tile. This way, the amount of flocking you need isn't actually that much. For this entire build, I only used about a third of this container. I also added snow flocking to the top of the rocks, wherever I thought they were flat enough for snow to gather. I let the glue dry for a few hours before removing the excess flocking, then letting them dry some more before adding the next layer. I ended up using 3 layers, or should I say blankets of snow flocking, before I was satisfied with the look and feel of it. Around the rocks I scattered these little tufts of dead grass that managed to poke through the snow. I tried to add these in places where I thought the stone might partially shelter the grass, preventing it from being completely covered in snow as well. Once all the layers of snow were on and all the tufts of grass placed, it was time to spray and seal using a mix of water and wood glue, in a ratio of 30% glue and 70% water. I sprayed the tiles a total of 3 times, letting it completely dry in between, and once done, everything was properly sealed into place. And there you have it. The basic snow tiles are all done. I can't wait to start putting these tiles to use. Keep an eye out for the next videos in which I'll be adding magnetic trees to these tiles to create a winter forest. For now, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to leave a like or comment down below. You can also follow me on Instagram for regular updates, and if you wish to support me, consider joining my Patreon. It does help a lot. And don't forget, winter is coming.